Hello, welcome back to Mark's House and Garden UK. In this video I want to explain 8 things I'm doing for the wildlife in my garden this winter. It's December and it's been really cold for the last week and it's forecast to be cold for the next 2 weeks. So I've taken some steps to help the wildlife in the garden and I'm going to share those steps with you in this video. Now, there are plenty of natural food sources in nature and in theory wildlife should be able to take care of itself. It's very much survival of the fittest. The fittest and the strongest will survive the winter and the weakest won't, and that's natural selection. But I don't think it's a bad idea to help supplement those natural food sources in times like this when it's particularly cold. So one of the things I've done is I've put birdseed down, and I've done this at various locations around the garden because don't forget, birds can be territorial. So 50 metres away there might be a bird looking over at this quite enviously thinking, I wish I could get to it and have some of that, but it daren't because it's not in its own territory. So at various locations around the garden I've put a mix of wild bird seed down, and I've put it out in the open, in a wide open space where the neighbouring cats can't attack the birds, because I believe a lot of our native birds are killed by domestic cats. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, I have an apple tree here, and every year it produces dozens and dozens, an abundance of these beautiful Bramley apples. And I do harvest some of them and give some to neighbours and friends, and we do use some, but the vast majority of them get left down on the ground here. And every morning when I wake up I see blackbirds and starlings and sparrows and robins and tits eating and nibbling and pecking away at these apples. So that's one of the steps I've taken to help the wildlife. But the other thing I do is I distribute these or redistribute them around the garden. Again, it's that territorial thing. If I put some over there, that gives access in another part of the garden to the wildlife that lives over there. Little mice and rodents might not venture this far. So if I redistribute some of this over there, it will help the nature in all parts of the garden. So now I am over in the wildlife corner of my garden, and there are certain things I did way beyond the start of autumn which will help the wildlife at this time of year. The first one is I built a nature hibernaculum, which is an underground cavity where the nature can crawl. There are certain things you should do if you want to create a hibernaculum, and I did a video on it and I will link to it at the end of this video. The other thing I did was I created a stick pile, and that stick pile is now an environment for lots of insects, and down in the centre of that stick pile, insulated by twigs and sticks, there will be a warm space which will be home to hibernating invertebrates. Behind me is the wildflower meadow, and it looks beautiful all summer long, and in fact it looked beautiful well into autumn. But the first sign of any frosts attacking it, it dies back, it goes brown, and it looks somewhat ugly, and there might be a temptation to go in there and hack it all away and clear it all up. But they do say for nature you should have a slightly untidy garden. So I'm leaving this. I'm leaving it for several reasons. Number 1, the birds will enjoy the seed heads that remain on the top of these flowers. Number 2, rodents at ground level will also benefit from the seeds that drop. And I might just trample around in here and encourage some of those seed heads to disperse their seeds, and some of those flowers will also then be closer to the ground where rodents can get to them. And don't forget, rodents in the garden are not a bad thing. They are part of the food chain. And the third thing I'm doing whilst I'm doing this is I'm setting the seeds for next year's wildflower bed. So it's a win-win-win really. So by leaving areas of the garden untidy, leaving seed heads on top of plants and trampling them down and just letting nature take its course, we're enhancing and helping nature in the garden. Over here is a bit of fun I had a few weeks ago. I made this totem pole. Let me bring the camera in a bit closer. This was simply an old log which I cut down from huge conifer which I removed 2 years ago, and it's been sitting around the garden, and I've been wondering what to do with it. And then one day I just thought, right, let's have a bit of fun. I'll make a totem pole. And I just used my handheld chainsaw and a drill to carve crevices and nooks in this piece of wood. I've also drilled in lots of holes. Now, what I've got here is a bowl with fat and birdseed in it. It's a bit like those fat balls you can buy from shops at this time of year, but you can make your own fat balls, and you can make your own fat, nutrient-rich bird feed simply by getting some lard from the supermarket, warm it up a little bit in the microwave just to soften it, and then mix in some wild bird seed, and then you can just smear that all over the face of your totem pole if you've got one. But if not, there's absolutely no reason why you can't smear this onto the bark of a tree in the garden. Now the thing about this is, different birds have different manners or ways of feeding. Some like to feed on the ground, others like to feed in the hedgerows and the undergrowth, and others like to climb and feed. So this will help the element of bird society which like to climb onto things. I just dropped a bit on the floor there, but I'm not bothered. In fact, why don't we just throw that in the back into the hedgerow? Some of the birds or the mice or the rodents can enjoy it. And I did check on the the RSPB website, just to make sure that the type of ingredients I'm using are appropriate. And the RSPB do recommend lard and suet and birdseed in a mix like this. And I've smeared that on there, and the birds can come and enjoy that, and I can replenish it at any time. So there we go. Leave seed heads, leave your wildflowers, let nature enjoy it, and make up a birdseed mix and smear it onto your trees. You can do this outside a tree, outside a window, where you can see it from inside the house, and you'll really enjoy looking at the birds that come and feed on it. And this is another very simple but effective idea I've had for the wildlife in the garden. It's an old tree stump from a conifer I removed, and rather than pull it out and dig it up, I've left it. And again, I've carved crevices into it, and I've drilled holes into it, hundreds of holes of various different sizes. And the crevices in the holes can be home to insects and other invertebrates that like to burrow away and hide for the winter. And that's what that is now. That is a bug hotel. It's an improvised and very simple bug hotel. And something as simple as that can be very, very highly effective. And not only will the bugs hide away in there, some of them will be predated by animals, other animals like birds, in the garden. So you're not just providing a home for invertebrates and bugs, you're actually helping with the food chain. And the food chain, of course, is the whole ecosystem in the garden. Now look at this. This is the wildlife pond. As you will know if you've been watching my channel, it's frozen solid, and I'm stood in a position here where I've seen birds all through the summer coming to drink. So they've got into the habit of coming down here for a drink. Unfortunately, if they come down for a drink at this time, they will leave disappointed and thirsty. And birds do need to drink. I can actually see dozens of little birdie footprints on top of the ice here. So what I'm going to do is leave water down in trays, and I'll have to refresh it and change it on a daily basis because it will freeze. And that water will be obviously a source of hydration for the birds. The important thing about water is check it and replenish it, and also don't have it too deep. And if you do have it slightly deep, make sure that you put something in it like a stick or a slate or a stone, so any small rodents or other bits of wildlife that might inadvertently find their way in there can escape. Water is important to wildlife, so don't just feed wildlife, give it a drink too. This is my pampas grass, or rather it's one of two pampas grass that I have in my garden. And those are the seed heads. And I leave some of those on here. And I have seen birds hanging on there, pecking away and eating those seeds. So leave that, but that's not the point here. That's a very, very dense grassy bush, and I've heard rustling in there. I frequently hear rustling. I can walk past here and I'm obviously disturbing something. I have seen hedgehogs on the lane past the cottage, so I know there are hedgehogs in the area. And somebody once told me on one of my videos, a subscriber made a comment saying that hedgehogs will very often set up home in the bottom of a pampas grass simply because it's so densely packed. And also the leaves have got sharp edges, so it deters predators from going in. So it could well be, and one day I might get one of those motion operated wildlife cameras, but it might well be that there's a hedgehog in here. So I'm going to start putting cat food down, and I will put a link to some advice on how to feed hedgehogs in the description box below this video. But there we go, some cat food for the hedgehogs. Now it could well be other animals like foxes or badgers or ravens or rooks come down and eat that. I'm not too worried about that. I can't just make it for the hedgehogs. In actual fact, I'm quite happy if it's for any wildlife in the garden.